Hello everyone, and this is Mr. Zagari coming at you from the Underground Garage with another edition of Zag's APUSH U.S. History. Today, review day. Test is this week, Tuesday and Wednesday, all multiple choice. That being said, we are going to be doing a quick under 10 minutes video on Farragut chapters 8 and 9. And what we're going to be looking at here today is the end of the articles, basically to the Monroe Doctrine. So we're going to Constitutional Convention. We're going to be talking about constitutional issues, bundles of compromises, revolution of Jefferson into the presidency, the first transition of power, and questions that are going to arise as a result of federal power. The argument that is the gift that keeps on living, states or feds. So sit back, relax, take out a number 2 pencil or a pen if you like, get your Farragut review sheets out, and let's get rolling. Okay, so our topic today starts at the end of the Articles of Confederation. Those things stunk, gone, kaputs. Okay, we start off with the Constitutional Convention. And the Constitutional Convention is going to be held in Philadelphia, and the Constitution itself is going to be a bundle of compromises. Okay, again, with the fundamental issues that we have been talking about in class over state versus federal power. Who has the power? That fear of a strong, consolidated central government is still going to be living on. And it's a question that we still answer to this day. So, the bundle of compromises. The first question, who has the power? What they decide to do is to divide the government. States are going to have some sort of power, and the federal government is going to have some sort of power. This is going to be called federalism. All right, the states are going to have reserved power. The federal government is going to have delegated powers. There's also going to be concurrent powers, items that they can both do, such as tax, promote for the general welfare. State powers are going to be marriage and divorce laws, intra-state commerce. Federalism is going to delegate powers to the Fed, reserve powers to the state, and also have some powers for both groups. You're also going to have a question of representation. Should representation, the actual seats in Congress, be based on population, or should it be based on equality? What we're going to see here is the Great Compromise. You're going to have a bicameral or 2-house legislature. The House of Representatives is going to be based off of population to appease the large states. The Senate is going to be based off of equality, 2 per state. That's going to appease the smaller states. So we have a way to... They came up with a way to compromise here to have both large and small states being recognized in the Constitution to make sure that power is balanced, to make sure that the federal government does not become too strong, or that one entity, they're going to separate the federal government into 3 branches: judicial, legislative, and executive. Legislators make the laws, the executives enforce the law, and the judicial interprets the laws. And to make sure not one branch becomes powerful than another, we're going to install a system of checks and balance. Again, they got this all taken care of. They were tired by the end of this convention, and somebody brought up the notion of a Bill of Rights, and they're like, no, don't worry about that. We don't need that right now. We're tired. We want to go home. Let's get this thing ratified. You know, civil liberties are already written down in each individual state constitution. So they went back, and then the ratification process started. Of course, there's going to be arguments and 2 factions at the Constitutional Convention, then spill over to the states, and you're going to have 2 groups. The Federalists, who are going to be led by Alexander Hamilton, and they're going to create the Federalist Papers to try to promote the ratification of this new federal government. And then you're going to also have the Anti-Federalists that are also going to write publications in support of why the federal government is becoming too strong under this Constitution, and that the ratification process should not be put into effect. So what do? They compromise again. And this is the last compromise, well, not really the last compromise of the Constitution, because they're always compromising, but the Federalists are going to agree to actually put in a Bill of Rights. So they write down the first 10 amendments, they put it in writing, and ratification takes place, and bingo, you got a new Constitution. So once George Washington now is sworn into office, and The first item that he's going to put on his plate is for Alexander Hamilton, his new Secretary of Treasury, to create a financial plan to fix the nation's struggling economic chaos that has been going on since the end of the revolution. I'm not going to go into detail into his financial plan. If that's something that you need help with, check out my last video on Hamilton's financial plan that goes into detail. Again, we're trying to keep this under 10. So as a result of Hamilton's financial plan, you're going to get factions that come about. You're going to get ways of interpreting the Constitution. Hamilton and his now new Federalist Party, all right, they're being called Federalists because they believe in a strong Constitution and they believe in a strong federal government, and they believe in a loose interpretation of the Constitution, like the implied powers of the Constitution. Whereas Jefferson and his new Republican Party, again, you cannot make the connection between the Republican Party of then to the Republican Party of now. They're going to believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They're going to believe that if it's not in the Constitution, it cannot be done. They feel that liberty and equality and democracy is in the hands of the agrarian farmer, the independent farmer. Calling Jefferson a farmer, again, like I've said in class, is like calling Bill Gates a computer salesman. It's not going to happen. But what you do get as a result of this issue is the rise of political parties. The Federalists morphed from the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party morphed from the Federalist faction of the Constitution. The Republicans morphed from the Anti-Federalist faction of the Constitution. That brings us into the Washington administration, and Washington obviously is our first president, and what he's going to be doing is creating precedents for the country to live by. Okay, the job has never been done before. Obviously, this is an experiment in democracy and giving power to the consent of the governed. So everything was new. Even what to call the president was new. That's why you get Mr. President rather than Your Highness, Your Excellency, those real monarchy type of terms. You're going to see the Constitution come into effect and to see if this Constitution is going to be a viable way to govern. You're going to see that with the Whiskey Rebellion. But what this also brings up is the fundamental questions of the Constitution, such as state versus federal power. Does a state have the right to do this? Does the federal government have a right to do that? So that brings us into the end of George Washington's presidency. Again, more on the rise of the questions of the constitutionality of things coming about with Hamilton's financial plan as a case study. You could look back on my video on that topic. So Washington's going to leave us. You're going to have the election of 1796, but before leaving, Washington gives a little bit of advice in his farewell address, and that advice, a couple of components of his advice are to steer clear of permanent alliances, to avoid political factions because they're going to create geographical divides, to stay out of these European affairs, to steer clear of that. And what he's doing here is he's setting the barometer. He's setting the yardstick for presidents to come after, and that's what they're going to use on their criteria as president. And we're going to see that with the Adams administration in 1796, where Adams is going to be trying to live in, he's got a difficult job. He's put into the, he's got big shoes to fill with George Washington, and he really believes in Washington's ideology, and he's trying to, steer the course that Washington left behind. So you have the XYZ affair. Again, Adams is showing the strength of the United States against the French in this French-British war that's going on in the United States. They're fearful of getting involved in it. They declared neutrality under the Washington administration, which is a huge component of his foreign policy, and Adams is trying to do the same thing. The United States cannot afford physically, mentally, economically to go to war right now. So they send the envoy, you get the XYZ affair, and that actually promotes Adams's popularity during the time period. He's standing up to the French, and he's keeping the United States out of war. Creates the Navy to defend our shipping rights throughout the world. Well, the XYZ affair is going to promote the two political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans, are still clamoring against each other. The Federalists under Hamilton are clamoring for war, and the Republicans are very pro-French and do not want to go to war with the France. So that's just always heightening the tensions between the two political parties and trying to get things done. Sounds like a lot like today. Again, history repeats itself. So you have Jefferson and Hamilton still going at it. And that brings us to this Alien and Sedition Act, which was a very, very hot topic during the time period where they wanted to expel any French immigrants, and they were fearful of sabotage and fearful that if we went to war with France, you're going to have 25,000 French immigrants just living in Philadelphia in and of itself. So they were just trying to say that it was for national security. They were also looking at it from the perspective of, well, these are all Republican voters, so we need to secure the legacy of the Federalist Party. And by doing so, they were going to push through this Sedition Act, this Alien Act. Another part of that was the Sedition Act, which you could not defame the federal government or any other type of governmental offices in print, whether it's true or false or whatever the case may be. And that's going to be a direct violation of the First Amendment. And especially Republicans like Jefferson and Madison are going to put this into effect and say the states don't have to follow this law because they feel it's unconstitutional. Again, we see that fundamental question of states' rights, and that's brought up in the Kentucky and the Virginia resolutions. So as Adams' presidency comes to a close during the election of 1800, he's actually beat by Thomas Jefferson. He's also beat by Aaron Burr. And during this time period, the president and whomever comes in second in the polling in the campaign, he actually becomes vice president. So Adams's vice was Jefferson in the election of 1800. Burr, who was supposed to just step down and in the case of a tie, just step down and cede the presidency to Jefferson, actually didn't. It goes to the House of Representatives. Hamilton comes out and says, this is Hamilton himself saying, it's better to have a man of bad principles, Jefferson, than having a man of no principles, Burr. So Aaron Burr does not get the presidency. Aaron Burr is going to be, he's going to be a murderer to Hamilton. He's going to be caught in treason and all kinds of crazy stuff. So Aaron is basically out during this time period, but he is the vice president. Jefferson does get the presidency as a result of a vote by the House of Representatives, and this brings us into the Republican presidency. It's the first time that we're having a transition of power between two political parties. And Jefferson says that we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans. He says that in his first inaugural. That's a bunch of baloney. All right, what he means is that we're all Federalists in the sense of we believe in the Constitution, not that we're all part of the political party of the Federalists, and that we're all Republicans, okay, meaning the political party. So if you remember that chart that we did at school with the Federalists coming from the Constitution, and on the other side of that, on the bottom was the Republicans as a political party. Jefferson is doing some cross multiplication there and basically saying that we believe in the Constitution but not the Federalist Party. So interesting fact there. One of Jefferson's biggest items during his presidency is his purchase of Louisiana. Okay, so what he's looking to do is actually roll back Federalist principles. He's looking to roll back Federalist principles. He wants this new Republican Party to be the ideology party of the new federal government. He wants to reinvigorate the ideals of the American Revolution, reinvigorate the Enlightenment, going back to small government, going back to small, strict interpretation of the Constitution. He wants to expand farming. He wants to expand the agrarian South. He wants to be able to have access to the port of New Orleans for those farmers that are living in that region. And of course, as a result of that, what do we get? Bam, we get the Louisiana Territory. We double the size of the nation. But what does Jefferson do? He actually uses a Federalist principle of the implied powers of the Constitution, so he goes back on it. He's also keeping the bus. The Bank of the United States is still in effect during this time period. He uses that Federalist ideology and then, to create economic stability. Now, one thing that we forgot to mention there is during the time between the Federalists leaving office and Jefferson entering office, you had the Marbury v. Madison, the Midnight Judges. You don't need to know the ins and outs of that case per se, but what you need to know is that it's Marshall. Marshall is your Chief Justice, and what he declared is that there is judicial review. So basically what that does, it makes the Supreme Court relevant. They could declare a law or an act constitutional or not. So it gives a lot of power to the Supreme Court. That we start to see, and the Marshall Court cases, which we've talked about with the like Gibbons versus Ogden and McCulloch v. Maryland, and all these cases, Fletcher versus Peck. These are all looking to they're in turn creating a stronger central government. With Gibbons versus Ogden, you have interstate commerce. With McCulloch v. Maryland, you have the issue of the supremacy clauses being used here. So the supremacy clause is being used where a federal law trumps, no pun intended, trumps a state law. Okay, if they have conflicting laws, it's the federal law that will always win out, and that's the supremacy clause. Obviously, the supremacy clause, the implied powers section of the Constitution, both of those notions are expanding the role of the federal government. So that's all during the Jefferson administration. And you're having issues with Jefferson and commerce in the Mediterranean, where you get the Barbary Wars, and you have the Embargo Act, which really, not only was he didn't really care if it was hurting the merchants of the East, it was actually also hurting his farmers, his constituents, I can't speak. So he actually repeals the Embargo Act of 1807, but what you're going to see is that Embargo Act, plus the impressment of sailors that are going to come during the Madison administration, between the United States and the French and the British. Plus, you're going to have issues on the frontier. Again, internal issues on the frontier during the Madison administration between the British and the Native American groups, where they're allying against settlers in this new Louisiana territory, and issues with the borders of Canada. Eventually, that's going to lead to the War of 1812 during the Madison administration. And again, Madison is a Republican. The War of 1812 ends with the Treaty of Ghent, and if you want to learn more about the War of 1812, there's a great History Channel video on it, but for our case, we need to know the big outcome of the war is that it's going to give us a sense of nationalism. We also get Andrew Jackson as a result of the War of 1812, but nationalism is the big thing where the thought is interdependence, that now you have three regions of the United States, North, South, and West, thanks to our friend Mr. Henry Clay, that these three individual regions can work together in harmony and create one independent nation, really talking about how the United States can be self-sufficient during this time period. So it was like, I don't want to call it a great awakening for America because I don't want to get anything confused with like the religious aspect of the Great Awakening, but it's another aha moment for American history where the United States is like, aha, we got this. We can do this on our own. We don't have to get involved in foreign affairs anymore. We don't need to be involved with the British and the French anymore. We can be self-sufficient. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is our domain. Let's steer clear. Like Washington said it himself, stay out of foreign alliances, stay out of European conflict. We don't need that. We're too young of a nation. We have our own problems to deal with. We have enough resources to be self-sufficient. So let's do it that way. Well, that ushers in our point of our foreign policy with President Monroe, which was actually written by Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, and the Monroe Doctrine is going to stipulate that all these new independent nations in the Western Hemisphere is going to be America's domain. It's going to be America where they're dealing with it. The British, well, not even the British were on board with the United States during this time period, but the French and the any other colonial powers, especially the Spanish, would be not involved in any affairs in the Western Hemisphere. Again, this is coming out of this notion of nationalism, this extreme sense of nationalism. All right, you have Henry Clay during this time period. The major casualty to come out of the War of 1812 was the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party is going to die out. As a result, you had a poor Adams administration, a poor Adams administration. You have Hamilton is assassinated by Aaron Burr. And what you're going to see here is now Henry Clay is going to come in, and he's trying to, this era of good feeling, to make America, this pride in America, and to show the rest of the world during this era that America could do this on their own. He creates this American system as a result of this, where he's taking tariffs and using tariffs for subsidies for roads and canals, and especially in the South. And he's also looking to recharter the bank. Okay, the bank lost its charter in 1811, and there's creating economic instability. So Henry Clay is coming at you with that continental approach, again bringing up the fundamental questions of the Constitution. Does the federal government have this power to create all these different components, very Hamilton-like? And in the end, the Federalist Party, while they may have died out, their principles were still alive. Their principles were still alive, and they were looking to make the country a much more stronger and global, independent nation. Connecting back to Farragut chapters 8 and 9, we're going from the Constitutional Convention to the Monroe Doctrine. We're really hitting upon here internal improvements for the United States. The United States coming into its own. All right, learning the ins and outs of becoming a new country, and coming out of the shadows of a developing nation to put its stamp on the world, not without question now, without questions of the Constitution, without questions of political parties. These are all fundamental, enduring issues that the United States is going to be dealing with for the next, till right now, okay, right to this moment. So, this is Mr. Zagari. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you took good notes. Again, we're striving for 5. We'll catch you later. Be well.